I'm not at all wanting to slam your faith. Your faith may be a really important part of your life. It's an important part of my life, but there's a difference between faith and institutionalized religion, and they often have different goals.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it. My name is Lyndsey Murray.
And I'm Denise Stratton.
And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers, and the topic for this episode is overcoming sexual shame. So Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers is a licensed sex and gender feminist psychotherapist, best-selling author, researcher, emerita professor, and media personality whose expertise spans sex therapy, spiritual intimacy, parenting, medicine, and social justice. Her revolutionary perspectives have been expressed on platforms such as Spirituality and Health, Refinery 29, Vocal, Medium, and Bust magazines, along with many podcasts, radio, news, and TV outlets. Known for exposing the impact of patriarchy and sexual shame on our ability to securely attach to our partners and instruct our children to attach to theirs, Dr. Sellers' book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, has had a global impact. Her latest book, Shameless Parenting, Everything You Need to Raise Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too, was a new release bestseller in 8 categories. She speaks throughout the world on how to heal and how to raise shame-free, relationally confident children. In 2015, Dr. Sellers founded the Northwest Institute of Intimacy, a postgraduate institute to train psychotherapists, educators, clergy, and physicians in sexual health, healing sexual shame and trauma, and understanding their sexual biases. In 2023, Dr. Tina founded ananarising.org, a private membership community for psychedelic-assisted therapists and medical providers to get ongoing clinical consultation, collaboration, training, and support in creating scholarships for the under-resourced and participation in an Indigenous Reparation Fund. Dr. Tina can be followed on Instagram at Dr. Tina Shameless. So, Dr. Tina, we're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with both of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a resume, I gotta say.
It happens when you get older. It just stacks.
Wow, I'm actually really curious. So I want to know a little bit about your background. How did you even get started on like the intersection of spirituality and sexuality?
Yeah, it was actually a very organic process. I often will say I did not set out to like take on the church or on its impact on sexuality or on people's lives, but it happened because I was teaching at Seattle Pacific for 28 years, and I taught in the graduate marriage and family therapy program, and I taught the human sexuality course. That's a required course for licensure. And I started teaching it. So this just tells you how old I am. I started teaching it in 1992. And one of the assignments I had my students do was write their sexual autobiography. And a lot of times people hear that and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine committing that to paper, right? But when you're going to be a therapist, you're only ever as good a therapist as you know where you begin and end your stories and where your clients begin and end. And so it seemed really important to me, not just in sexuality, but actually throughout our program, we would have students write about their gender and their relationship to medicine, just all kinds of different aspects of family of origin, like know yourself so that you're clear, you're not projecting your stuff onto the people you're trying to serve. So one of the last courses they took was the human sexuality course, and they all knew it was coming. Like it was like the buzz, throughout the program. You guys are going to do this. I'm the only one that's going to read them. And I'm going to try to give you some like a broader perspective if that needs to be. In other words, if you dealt with a lot of shame, I'm going to be writing on the side, oh, sweetheart, you were so normal. You were so fine. Like I'm going to be like trying to help you have a conversation around this, since I know so many people are underground with regard to their sexual stories. So I don't know, I've read like 600 of these in my career. And it really gives you an insight into a story that people often leave way down deep underground. And when you have a country like ours that has not had comprehensive sex education, has just had an epigenetics of shame around and ignorance around sexuality, you start to learn a lot about what people have been thinking about themselves in relationship to their own sexual development and story. So right around the year 2000, I started to notice this dramatic increase in things like self-hatred and self-disgust around their sexuality and their sexual story, although the stories they were describing were falling by and large, for sure, by and large, in the realm of common, right? First this, first that, thinking this, thinking that, not thinking this, thinking that, whatever was, so the story arc hadn't changed all that much, but how they felt about themselves and what they thought was normal had dramatically changed. So I didn't understand what I was seeing, to be honest. Why was this happening? And I literally would be in tears. These papers could be anywhere from 10 to 30 pages, and they would take me an hour and a half to read. And I would just be in tears because to me, these were these like precious humans who I'd come to love, who had thought of themselves so poorly. And it just really broke my heart. So I thought I need to figure out what's been going on. So I started asking more questions to both clients and to students, tell me more about what was going on and whatever. And so I started to get, and again, I really missed this because of my own age and the age of my children, and also who I am and my background. I missed purity culture. I missed what was happening. And when I say purity culture, I know for lots of people, that's because they had an involvement in the church. But we have to understand that beginning in 1980 with Reagan and onward, we began to pump billions of dollars into abstinence-only education, which was religious education in the public schools. So there were people who didn't necessarily go to youth groups, didn't necessarily come from a conservative background, but were feeling all these things too. And I found that the people who were most earnest and most naturally anxious, they absorbed this the most. So I was hearing things about pelvic pain disorders, erectile dysfunctions, things that you don't usually see in somebody who's in their 20s and early 30s. So I just started to kind of piece together that, and I would get students would start to just tell me stories like, here's what happened in my youth group. We were passed around a piece of foil, and then we were told to crumple it up while somebody was talking. And then when they were done, we were told to open it up and to look at how many creases were in it. And that's what we would be like if we gave ourselves away, right? Emotionally, physically, so on and so forth. And I was mortified. And I have to tell you that probably one of the reasons I responded so strongly to it was I had grown up in a Swedish immigrant home. And so there was epigenetics of bodies are bodies. Everyone has one.
Yeah.
What are your questions? I got answers. It didn't matter if it was my grandparents, my great aunts, uncles, parents. I mean, sexuality was talked about in sort of what I'd call a soundbite kind of way throughout my growing up, in the kitchen, anywhere, And so I thought, until literally this moment in time, I thought my family was typical. And as I began to read these stories, I started to realize, wait, my family wasn't typical at all. Like I had the weird family, and this was what people were experiencing, gradations, of this. So then I just started to speak about it and write about it. And then that word kind of got out. And then it was like 2006. I was approached by a journal called The Other Journal, Intersection of Theology and Culture. And they asked me if I would write about it. And I said, I don't know who your audience is. I'm not going to come out as an expert, but I'll come out and tell you what I'm seeing. I'll come and tell you the trends I'm seeing and my concern about it, and how it's manifesting in people's lives and how I think it's affecting them in their lives, their ability to do attachment, to believe they deserve love and can give love, like it's the core to people's happiness. It was affecting people there. And so I just started writing about it. Well, that particular article kind of went viral, and I started to hear from people literally around the globe. And I thought, okay, I've hit a nerve. I better take this seriously. And I just really started doing hardcore research. And then it took me 11 years to write Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, where I wanted to answer some, or try to attend to some questions like, has Christianity always been sex negative? or was there ever anything that was sex positive that's along that Abrahamic line? Because I knew people that couldn't embrace Eastern philosophies and thinking. And so I thought, if there's anything that's on a line they're familiar with, I want to know about that. And I want to understand the history a little bit better. And then I wanted to look at what's the marriage between a capitalistic society like ours that values products over people and this way of thinking. Like, are there ways in which those kind of come together that we should know about, talk about, because it could be affecting us even more, like punctuating things we don't want to be punctuated necessarily. And not by not knowing, we can't evaluate, right? We can't say, well, what do we think? And I wanted to look at what was the impact of sexual shame. By that point, I'd been treating people for so long and kind of figured out a model that might be helpful. And then I wanted to talk about what are practices that you can do, things that you can do that might help for you bring together deep meaning, things that are meaningful to you, and touch in a way that feels congruent with who you are authentically as a human. And so that's kind of what I tackled. And it kept me in that conversation deeply for such a long time that I really think there was a universal grace or wisdom in that. Because when I started out, I was angry. I was angry for these just precious people. And by the end, I was still angry, but I could talk about it in a way where I understood the systems by which people came from. And of course, that's what happens when you do these kinds of things and you're ignorant and don't understand it. So that's what happened. I was doing marriage and family therapy, and I was running a medical family therapy program. I was not in the sexuality world necessarily, but I was teaching it, and it changed the trajectory of my career.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a way, it kind of came to you,
Yeah.
it came to you. And it's, your family being not typical. We're both from Texas. So you can imagine
Okay.
here, very abstinence based, and
Yeah.
still to this day, not
Mhm.
really true sex education in the schools.
Yep.
And I think, Denise, you and I have maybe some similarities in terms of our families didn't talk about it at all. And we always say the silence is so loud. Like, kids can kind of
Yes.
know if we don't talk about it, it must be bad. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I remember watching documentaries about like certain parts of Europe, which I'm assuming Sweden's in that part where
Yeah.
sex talk is just very normal, very there are even some parents who facilitate like their
Mhm.
kids' first
Mhm.
sexual experience in the home, like it's okay. It's like not something that
Absolutely.
you have to worry about. And
No,
I
we wouldn't want you in a car.
Exactly, which I found so enlightening. And
Yeah.
I will say my mother was pretty different, just like yours as well, as far as like being able to talk about things and sharing certain information. Like I was the weird one in my school that knew all the terms and sexual things before, anyone else did. But my general family, I come from a very conservative Hispanic background, and they also have ties to like the Jehovah Witness sector. So everything's very, we don't talk about everything's secret, everything's under the
Mhm.
covers. So it's really nice to see that there are other parts of the world. And I remember in that documentary, in those European nations, I remember that like teen pregnancy was almost non-existent,
Mhm.
that safe sex was something that everyone practiced. Like these are
Yeah.
things that I thought was revolutionary, and I wish the US got behind as well.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
It's really something that there's a wonderful book if you ever feel like reading it. And I recommend this sometimes to parents, and it's called Not Under My Roof. And it's
Mhm.
written by a woman who grew up in Holland in the Netherlands. And she came to the US to do some studies and started to notice just how weird things were between kids and their parents around sexuality. Holland has one of the best comprehensive sex education programs in the world, followed by like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, the sort of Northern European countries. And it starts in kindergarten. And it starts in kindergarten because there are things that kids have questions about in kindergarten. And so
Yeah.
they just stay developmentally appropriate all the way along. And so she decided to do a beautiful qualitative study, taking two families in Holland in different towns, two families in the United States in different towns, and just interviewing them and their kids. And and then she turned it into a lay book where you get to hear the kids and hear the parents talking. And you're like, oh, this is so different. This is so different. It's akin to, how did you talk about health with your kids? How did you talk about how you brush your teeth with your kids? How did you talk about like just taking care of your room? I don't know, just like regular life stuff that you want your kids to know something about. That's sexuality, and your relationship to your body and your relationship to others is no different.
Yeah, I think the age appropriate or like the developmentally appropriate, I think a lot of people here in the US, or at least in this area, like people I've talked to, I think there's this assumption that like if you talk to your kids about sex, it's almost like you're teaching them inappropriate things. And like, and if we, and if you, if we were talking to people here and it was like, hey, we could start a kindergarten, I would imagine we would get you're great. What? We would, that's way too young, but it's not too young because
No.
they've already got questions, already kind of curious. They may already feel things and they don't know what to do with that. Um,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've got little ones. I always say kids' hands, stop banging on them, when they're about 10 months old and they start to realize oh, that belongs to me. I could reach out and
Yeah.
grab things. Well, it is within 2 months, often of that time frame, somewhere right around a year, the child's getting their diaper changed or they're in the tub and they'll discover their genitals. And that is a fabulous day for them because it's a
Mhm.
place of so many wonderful nerve endings and it's right there, where most kids can get to it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have somebody going, yeah, that's your vulva, it's fabulous, or that's your penis, it's such a wonderful part of you, then that's it. Basically, you're just giving them the information. Well, you're already labeling every other part of the world for them. That's toast. That's a car.
Mhm.
That's your puppy. Like you're already doing it. It's the same thing. So literally at each age, and that's why the Shameless Parenting book starts birth to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, all the way up to 18, because there are different things kids are curious about at each developmental phase. And your job is to just answer that question, just that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that journey was very significant, and I wanna go back to, like, where it started, which was the, sexual autobiographies that you would give your
Mhm.
students. That's fascinating. How, like, what does that entail? Is that just, like, just tell the story from the first time you had sex and how it is now, or what would
Oh,
entail?
yeah. Yeah, no. So because I think of it as fundamental to the way that we relate, like, okay, humans, I believe, regardless of how you're wired, we have desires for connection with other humans
Mhm.
and sharing pleasure, alone or with other humans. Like it's just connection and pleasure. An infant comes out, they're rooting towards the breast, not because the milk is there, but because connection and pleasure, right? You walk down the halls of an Alzheimer's unit, people don't have memory, they are still seeking connection and pleasure. It is core to the human experience, right? And so when I gave them like, I don't know, 60, 70 questions, something like that. And in fact, you can go to my website and there's a thing that says the Sexual Reclamation Project, and you can click
Oh.
on that and it'll give you literally the questions.
Oh, okay, cool.
But I would walk them through like, how was affection demonstrated in your family? How was touch demonstrated in your family? Discipline, how safe did you feel? Tell me about grandparents, tell me about parents, tell me about aunts and uncles, that kind of thing. And then I walk them into, what do you remember about your developing curiosity about your body, sexuality, and other people from when you were like little or elementary school? Let's talk about junior high. And so I just walked them through really around the idea of connection and pleasure. How did that evolve over time for you? And what messages were you getting that was facilitating that or shutting it down? Yeah.
Right, even those are questions that no one's ever asked to me, so there'd be a lot of self-reflection in that paper, I can even imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do something similar with with my clients that come in specifically for sex therapy.
Mhm.
Like even in couples, I'll see them each one time and go over similar questions to that.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting assessment because um some people know a lot of those answers and some people have never thought about it ever their whole life. And so you can see they're almost stunned, like, "Oh, I don't really know. I have to, like, think about that," or, "Oh, maybe this is what it," it's just interesting to see the wheels spinning, right, of,
Right.
"Huh, all of that has impacted me where I'm at
Yes.
now."
Yeah.
Yeah. So people are functioning from a place of reactivity rather
Mhm.
than choice.
Yeah.
Right. And we want people to feel empowered in their lives, and autonomous in their lives. But things have to go from the implicit to the explicit, sometimes in order for us to reflect on things. And so much of sexuality, but really the way we do connection and pleasure, the way we do interpersonal, intimate relationship is so underground that people are living out that place with just a lot of reactivity. And then that amounts to, I think, lots of people having less good or what feels to them to be nourishing attachment with people. And
Mhm.
they're having much more conflict than they want to have. Right. And yeah.
So as someone who's like read hundreds of these papers, in your opinion, how does sexual shame, like how does it manifest? Like where does it start? And I guess also how does it affect relationships and body image and your life?
Attachment as well, yeah.
Yeah. Great question. I'll actually share with you a definition of sexual shame in a second. This definition came out of a dissertation where somebody who had been following my work wanted to do something on religious sexual shame, but she said, we don't even have an operational definition of sexual shame. And this was 2017.
Mhm.
No operational definition from research. And so
Wow.
she did the work. She came up with a definition from her interviews. I remember reading, and I was coming back from a speaking thing on the plane, and I'm reading it, and it was like I just saw in black and white what I'd been experiencing from people for so long, and I thought, this is why this is so important that we understand this, because it has such a profound effect on people, on the deepest parts of people's lives, the places where we have the biggest potential to provide happiness for them to build a life of deep meaning and purpose that feels good to them, or hurt them there. And this is what it is. So what is it? I'll just talk about it briefly, then I'll go over the definition. If a child is naturally expressing a curiosity of any kind, and the authority figure in their life sees that, hears that, and just gets angry with them, right? Gets loud, gets big, makes a big face, pulls away from them emotionally.
Mm.
The child doesn't know how to make sense of that because they're just being themselves. They were just being naturally themselves. That's what shame is. And if you imagine that you've got a child that discovers their penis or their vulva at 11 months old, they're pre-verbal. The person that providing them life has now slapped their hand away or said, gross, that's dirty, really loud, right? They have no idea what that is. And they also don't stop doing that because they don't have the cognitive capacity to remember and to do that until they're like 3 or 4. And then it's like, oh, I can remember, I can go into my room to touch myself, right? But they don't remember that till then. So they're still doing it hundreds of times and getting in trouble all the time for being who they are
Mm.
fundamentally,
Mhm.
right? Now, other shame will get added onto this. They bring in a glass bottle of milk and drop it on the slate floor and it goes crazy and mom loses her mind or dad loses their mind or whoever. So that other shames happen that are just an accident, right? They're just being themselves. But when it's routinely around your body and your desire for connection and pleasure. So let me give you a little example of what I mean by desire for connection and pleasure and what that looks like in a 3-year-old. Okay. They get out of the tub, they've been in there playing, they've had their mask on, right? They've just been having so much fun. They get out, they get dried off, they start running around the house. I'm naked, I'm naked, I'm naked. Mommy, kiss my penis. Okay. Typical, fine from their world, completely fine, but parent loses it over that. That's gross. Don't ever say anything like that, right? The child can't make sense. So that part of my body's bad, I guess, or I'm bad.
Mhm.
And these kind of things just fold in onto themselves over and over and over again. And so it's a developmental process that keeps going and it starts pre-verbally and it's fundamentally communicating that you as a person are not okay. You might not even be lovable, right? So
Mhm.
shame is deep. It's deep, and it affects our ability to believe that we deserve love, or that people would even love us, or that we should even love people. That so we put a mask on. I wear my mask. I live out of my mask. Somebody receives love out of my mask. But I think, yeah, that's not really from me, right? Because if they knew me, they couldn't possibly love me, right? So it's deep. It's deep. So let me tell you the definition so you can hear it, because I just think it's profound, and it is what we see so much in people's lives. It's heartbreaking to me. Sexual shame is a visceral feeling in your body, not just here, in your body, a visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy. This feeling can be internalized, which is where it goes, internalized, but it also manifests in interpersonal relationships. That's where it begins, like me and
Mhm.
other interpersonal relationships, having a negative impact on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy. So in my book, you don't hurt anybody more than hurting them right in those places, right?
Mhm.
Because this is where we do our core attachments. Sexual shame develops across the life cycle, like I was talking about, in interactions with interpersonal relationships, then one's culture and society. You're not this, you're not that enough. And then creates a subsequent critical self appraisal. So we have an internal feedback loop, an internal critic that just then keeps going the rest of our lives unless we do something about it. There is also a fear and uncertainty related to one's power or right to make decisions, including safety decisions related to sexual encounters, along with an internalized judgment toward one's own sexual desire. Like, I can't possibly be desirable. And that last bit, what I think is really significant about it is that in Dr. Noel Clarke's dissertation, she was not interviewing people from religious backgrounds. She was just I think there were only a couple that identified that way. Okay. So what we have to realize is how widespread sexual shame is in our culture, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not, we can't just say that it's religious. And so you have I don't know if either of you have read the book Girls and Sex or Boys and Sex, either book by Peggy Orenstein, but Girls and Sex. Peggy Orenstein's a New York Times journalist. She interviewed 80 girls, ages 15 to 22, and she was just, getting to know them, finding out things, and she said they would be able to talk about themselves competently and confidently in every area of their life until they got ready to go out, and then they were putting down 3, 4, and 5 shots of hard liquor because they didn't know if they could keep themselves safe or if they had the right
Mhm.
to, right? So this
Wow.
is the rape culture that we have cultivated since 1980. It has
Yeah.
been increasing with our focus on violence against women in every single media form and every new media form that emerges, right? And so we now have sexual shame is rampant across our culture, and we have kids being hurt all the time. I'll often say, and probably the last 15, 20 years, I haven't talked to somebody under the age of 40 that was actively out pursuing some kinds of relationships who haven't experienced at least one sexual encounter they didn't want.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
that's how prevalent this ignorance and this sense of I can do whatever I want to because I'm an individual and I have individual rights, or whatever the deal is, that we have going on out there. So I know that's a long answer to your question, but it's a big deal, I think.
That's a really great comprehensive definition,
Yeah.
and
For
I'm even
sure.
and I'm even thinking about work, like, when I have clients come in, individual or couple, I see a lot of desire discrepancy, which seems to be, like,
Yeah,
the biggest
sure.
issue that comes in,
Yeah.
but when someone is, sitting with shame, I mean, it makes total sense why they're not wanting to just have sex every day. I mean, it's so much, it's like something I always want people to know about the job is that I think it's easy to focus on like the number, like try to have sex twice a week, or it's not ever, it's rarely that simple, right? It's so deep rooted.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
so, yeah, and I know that you know firsthand, it's not that simple. It's very complex.
Yeah. It's very
Yeah.
complex, and it's especially complex in our cis het relationships
Mm-hmm.
because there is such a long history of patriarchy, and that it's
Yes.
about ejaculations and erections and what the man wants. And so women have learned often to defer. They don't even think they have a right to, or that they are
Mhm.
even sexual, or, and so then they have obligatory transactional sex from the get go, which I don't
For
care who you are. That is
years.
just not fun.
No,
That
and
is
some
just
of them
not
have
fun.
it and some of them have it for years. They've been
Yeah.
married 15
Yeah.
years, and that's been the bulk of their sexual experience.
Right. And then so I'm always like, oh, sweetie, no wonder you don't like it. You don't have choice and autonomy here. And
Mhm.
I'll say to him, what's it like for you to have sex with your wife when you can tell she doesn't want to be there? Like you can see it in her eyes, you can
Yeah.
feel it in their touch. She doesn't really want it. What's that like? And more times than not, guys are like, I don't like it, but I just don't know what to do. I think we wouldn't touch at all if we
Mhm.
didn't do that.
Mhm.
But I don't like it at all. It's not what I want. And I'm always like, okay, then we are going to set all that aside and we are going to start over. We are
Yeah.
starting over because if you're both not experiencing connection and pleasure, I don't care what you're doing, it's bad sex.
Yeah.
It's just bad. And we want you to have really good, loving, what feels like you feel seen, known, loved, and accepted. So let's start all over. And I'll say, I want you to know we set you up for this. The culture set you up for this. This is not
Mhm.
about you.
Yeah.
This is because this is what we gave you to work with. And it was always going to end you here.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the sex is bad, what is there to desire? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Nothing.
Most of us don't desire things that are bad or uncomfortable or we feel, used by or anything. I mean, that's human. And
Yeah.
that's good that we don't like that. That's
Mhm.
information.
But I wanna bring up, I mean, just like you said, it's a lot of what society teaches you, a lot of what especially the American culture teaches you. I mean, just this week, I saw a huge influencer on, YouTube, he's huge, and he was basically, spewing that you shouldn't want to pleasure a woman because that's gay for you to, pleasuring a woman making a woman come is gay because heterosexual couples should be having sex for a purpose and only gay people have sexual encounters for pleasure and it's there's not a purpose to it. So I mean, so that's the
Mhm.
rhetoric that is being spewed to literally millions and millions of people on the internet. And
Unbelievable.
even a lot of and this is a lot in the conservative culture as well, a lot of the teachings that we get are sex is just for procreation, like that's what we're supposed to be doing with it. It's not really meant to be a fun thing. A lot of times sex even gets put in like the sin category if we focus on pleasure, right? So I'm curious, in your opinion, what do religious teachings, like how do they affect our sexual shame
Mm.
in your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to unpack that question just a little bit because when we talk about religious teaching, we're talking about one thing, and the thing is, it's not one thing.
Okay.
And
Mm.
what is religious teaching, or who is a particular form of religious teaching? Who's it serving and who's not it serving? So more often than not, right now, the pop kind of what we hear the most out there that we're calling religious education or religious teaching is in support of patriarchy, power and control, not in support of Jesus or whoever is the core person underneath your religion. Who's your core icon, your core, God or whatever, and what were the values that predicated your faith on? That's not what's happening. What's happening is it's power and control. Power is with white landowning men, and that's what we are going to continue. And we're going to continue to say, because we've been doing this forever, this is what God wants. This is what God says. This is religion. Well, it's not. It's not at all. And believe me, having run around with a bunch of theology professors, I love how they argue. They don't agree on most of it. But the reason I asked the question that I asked, like, is there anything positive that's been on the Abrahamic line? was because I really wanted to know, if we go back further, do we find things that are beautiful and supportive of the human experience of connection and pleasure? It's there. It's not in the Christian story, because we have to understand that Jesus had a lot to do with connection and pleasure and sort of helping people, stay connected, be honest, all of that, the mutuality and justice and really important things. But empire or institutional Christianity didn't get started till the 4th century. And that was when Constantine, who was the emperor, he had the power, he became a Christian. He began to appoint the leaders of this new church, right? That had been going on for 400 years, but it hadn't been institutionalized. So the way the men were arguing as to who was more spiritual than the others in front of Constantine was by saying that they were denying the body better than this person and that person, denying the body the best. That's what was going on in the 4th century amongst the men. We know this because of Augustine. I talk about this in the book. It was all about deny, deny, deny. It wasn't about, well, who gave this to you in the first place? Who gave you the desire for connection and for being seen, known, loved, and accepted? What do we see is the continuous arc across the human experience around this, right? So I found many things, many stories. I think there's about 8 stories in the book of beautiful Jewish writing, mystic writing, and text writing on sexuality and pleasure and mutuality and affirming and whatnot. And at the time that I was doing that particular part of the research, I had a Jewish student who taught in a Jewish day school. And so I would bring him, I'd be like, I found this. Is this real? Like, what is this? And he'd be like, oh, yeah, So there's a thing called the vow of Ona. And he said, I teach that right now. I teach that to my students. And I said, why did this not come forward? Like, this is sound. You could run your dating life. I don't care what ilk you are. You could run your dating life by this. You could run your committed life by this. You could raise your children by this. Like, I just don't understand why this didn't come forward. He goes, well, it's forward with us. We talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, not in Christianity. This has not been talked about ever. So I'm going to read you a couple of these just so that you can hear and these are thousands of years old, right? These are thousands of years old. All forms of sexual touch are recognized and valued. The purpose of all sexual touch is to reinforce the loving bond over the lifespan. The idea of the elderly not being sexual in the Torah, in the teaching, was a totally foreign concept. Sex is considered a woman's right, not a man's. The husband has a duty, an ona, to ensure that all forms of sexual touch are pleasurable to her. He is to study her. Okay. Now, a lot of people hear that and they're like, that is so counterculture to the Western culture, right? It is counterculture. But the thing is that if you understand human development, you can see that if you raise your boys to start paying attention to the needs of other as a child, pay attention to that. Then when you're in a culture that's kind of all about you, you've been learning this other skill. And you've also been learning how important relationships are to you as a human. If you've been teaching your girls, it's not just about everybody else. It is also about you. And you have to have voice. And you have to have standards about how you want to be treated. Because if you don't, you're going to let yourself be treated in ways that aren't okay. And that's not what you're created for. You're created to be adored and cherished. And so you teach that to girls. Now you've got kids in their 30s who are much better able to recognize how to have a full egalitarian mutual relationship, rather than waiting until they're in their mid 40s or 50s. And she's finally saying, I've had enough. It's got to be about me now. And he's finally saying, having a second family and saying, I spent way too much time thinking career and money was going to make me happy. And it's not what's making me happy. What makes me happy is my relationship with my kids and my interpersonal relationships. Read what Steve Jobs wrote the last week of his life. You see this stuff over and over again. So this is beautiful. This line is beautiful for its on face value, but it's also beautiful because it helps people create attachments that can stand the test of time, because they understand the mutuality that must be involved if you're going to grow and evolve together over time. So I remember just had one of those. Sex is to be celebrated in joy, not in sadness, anger, disinterest, or self-interest.
Mhm.
Sexual enjoyment is recommended also at times when procreation is impossible, when, for example, when using contraception during pregnancy or where behaviors may not result in pregnancy. A man is never to force or coerce his partner to be sexual through emotional or physical tactics. Sex is not to be used as a weapon against a spouse either by design, either by depriving sex or compelling sex. It is considered a serious offense to use sex in any way to manipulate or punish a partner. All forms of sexual touch are permissible. I think I read that one. Yeah, if they're desired by both partners. So you have to have a
Mhm.
equal power playing
Yeah.
there, right? So somebody has the freedom to say, I don't think I'm into that today. Yeah. So these are thousands of years old. So when people say it's religious, I'm like, well, your religion is serving something else.
That's such a good way to put it because I always think about what I know about like quote unquote religious teachings, like from what we know from our time and I think more modern,
Hmm. Hmm.
I hadn't even thought to go. I mean, it's good that you went back to see was there
Right.
something different at one point in time?
Right. And again, I was just thinking about the people that, the students that it would matter to and the clients that it would matter to. And I thought, I studied Tantra. I knew a lot about that and I taught about that. But there were a lot of people who just felt too foreign to them, that created a loyalty bind for them. So I'm like, I need to find out if there's anything here I could give you that would help you see that you were created for connection and pleasure and that it's a good thing and that God must have a purpose in it. The God of the Abraham line must have a purpose in this for you. You know, if it's something that they want and they're not and
Yeah.
they're experiencing it in a way that's hurtful or not enjoyable.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that the Jewish teachings are a little bit more sex positive than like the Christian teachings. I apologize. I'm very ignorant when it comes to like the religious sector. It's not something that really I grew up with. My surroundings were very religious, but my immediate family
Mhm.
was not.
Yeah.
But anyway, so when it comes to Christianity, like are you saying like, am I hearing it right with Constantine is kind of where our sex negative culture really like took
Yes.
off?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, if we built a sex positive um, construct around what we learned around how Jesus treated people and how Jesus treated the body, we would have come up with something very different. There's a story in the Gospel of Luke, I believe, where Jesus is at a kind of highfalutin dinner party, and a woman comes in, drops down on her feet at his feet, and breaks a very expensive vial of perfume and begins to rub his feet and his legs, crying and using her hair to rub it in. And she's just weeping. And he receives it all. Now, this is like fancy dinner party, receiving it all. And then when the disciples say, what are you doing? And he said, I want you to look at her, how she is loving me, how she is receiving me. I tell you, this story will always be spoken because what did you do when I came in the door?
Mhm.
So the fact that you can receive that much love and adoration and affirm the person for being that loving and vulnerable, to me, that's an example of making love to somebody,
Mm.
receiving it fully and honoring it fully. I don't know a better picture than that. And so I'll say that, like, we had an image of how making love could look if your heart was completely open and your mind and body was completely present to yourself and to the other. We have an image of that. We could have built a sexual ethic on that, on Jesus' life. We did not. So we have never had a Christian, i.e., sexual ethic. We have had one about patriarchy, power, and control in men, period. That's why queer folks are often having so much better sex because they
Yeah.
actually say to each other, well, tell me what you're into. Like, let's figure this out first. And so then they're enjoying themselves all along the way because they know to keep asking that question. And we knew this with Masters and Johnson studies of queer and straight sex in the 70s. The last thing he observed, or they observed, nothing's changed.
Well, I am curious about the your model, the MESS, the MESS, or the model
Mhm.
for erasing sexual shame.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So this is what kind of developed just as I was doing all the research and writing and thinking and whatnot. But continuing to see clients and continuing to work with students, every week. And so I just noticed that there were basic things that I was sort of repeating over and over to kind of help them ask questions and dispel their own assumptions that were getting in the way, right? So, healing the mess, the model for erasing sexual shame, is basically 4 different areas that we look at over and over and over again, kind of like peeling an onion, if you will, or taking apart a rubber band ball. We're kind of just taking things apart and looking at them. So, it's frame, name, claim, and aim. Frame is get yourself a frame or a scaffolding of sex education. Like you need to know the stuff that you were taught that was bogus, and you need to know what is true about this magnificent human body that you are living your life from. Like it's nothing short of a miracle. And every single day that you get up and you're not in a ton of pain, you're like able to live your life in some kind of way that's meaningful to you, then your body is the pen to write the poetry of your life. That's what you're getting to do. It's a good thing. I don't care what it looks like. I'm always saying to
Yeah.
people, your shape of your body, how it is inside and out, has more to do with your heredity than it has to do with how many Oreos you're eating or anything else. Your heredity shapes things so much more. And we just live in a culture that is hell bent on making you feel bad about yourself. So you keep purchasing things and making corporations
So
wealthy.
more shame. It's your fault.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we run our economy on it.
Mm-hmm.
Run our economy on people feeling bad. We have 50% of 6-year-olds, 2/3 of 9-year-olds, 90% of 15-year-old girls modifying their diets already.
Wow. Ooh.
And that does
Yeah.
so much long-term damage. Oh
Mm.
my gosh. Oh my gosh.
I know, and you see it all the time. You see it when you're a therapist or somebody that listens to these kinds of stories. You see it all the time how it's affecting people's lives, and it's so not okay, right? So that's get yourself a frame so that you can start to go, I never knew that. Oh my gosh. Wow, really? Wow, like you start to just dispel. You make the covert overt, right? That's frame. Name is tell your story to someone loving and empathic. And it could be a group of friends. I'm often saying grab the book, grab Sex God in the Conservative Church and start a book group, and then stop along the way and tell your stories. What was it like for you? What did you learn in 2nd grade or 3rd grade in your family, whatever? Tell your story because you're going to find out you weren't alone. You're
Yeah.
not alone, right? So tell your story. Shame has a hard time thriving if it's made sort of public. Like if you tell it to somebody empathic and compassionate and it's heard in that context, then you're like, oh, I guess I'm okay. I guess I'm not that bad. So it really helps it to go away. So that's name. So frame, name, claim is claim your body is good. Now, easier said than done, right? So much easier said than done, but it's worth continuing the journey of being like, yeah, this is a good arm, this is a good belly, this is a good rump. I like, just like start to
Yeah.
see you as precious, because you absolutely nothing has changed from the time that you were born until you're going to be older. I mean, it's just it's all good. It's you are good. So see it as good. And it's work. So when you do these things, frame, name, and claim, what you'll find will happen is that the shame begins to diminish, and you find yourself designing or aiming for a new ethic, a new story for yourself and for anybody that you could influence, because something new is emerging. So it's like aiming for a new sexual ethic that works for you, that feels right, that feels honoring, caring, whatnot. So but these aren't things you do overnight or you do once. You're always working on them. And so if you've got a community of people that you can work on it with them, you'll all be celebrating each other's, like milestones, like,
Mhm.
yay, go, so.
Okay, cool. That is awesome. I'm gonna have to start. Is that on your website as well?
uh,
The layout
It's
of
in the
that?
book.
Okay.
It's in the book. I don't call it the mess because I was still working on it when the book went to publication, but I
Okay.
call it the model for erasing sexual shame. So it's in the book, and then I talk about each one. There's also a chapter on the anatomy of intimacy that talks about all the ways that we can build intimacy with ourselves and with another. And it really also has to do with kind of getting clear about different things that got built up along the way. And a lot of times in our culture, we think about sexuality as just concerning the body. And this is 7 concentric circles, and the body is just the first one. So
Mhm.
you have the body, and then you have sensuality, and then you have desire, and then you have the heart, right? And then you have like trust and intimacy. Then you have like beauty, deep beauty, and then you have ecstasy. Like it's something that you can build to be a deep thing, and you can be 90 and having a great time.
Hey.
I love
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, the body positivity exuding from you is insane. Like it's
Aw,
really nice to hear actually.
Yeah.
Like you said, we're in a culture of, you need to change your body to fit this norm, right? Um,
right.
One thing I want to ask is pretty much like what your advice would be to like foster this healthy I don't know, sexual encounter with a partner. Like if what am I asking? If like one partner is really shame about their body, is there something that the other partner can do to kind of help foster this very positive environment in the sexual bedroom?
Yeah. I think if a partner is able to say, so here's the deal. I want our touch to communicate to you how much I care about you.
Mhm.
So I need your help a little bit in that to tell me, yeah, that I like that, that feels good, or that doesn't. And I want to go kind of probably ridiculously slow. So you have all the space you need to even make the face like, or whatever. So I can follow you. I want to study you. I literally want to understand because you're a different human than I am. So I'm going to have different things. But if I don't take the time to go slow and really listen and watch, I'm not going to get you right. And I want to get you right. Like I want this to feel good to you.
I love that.
And and I recognize that sexuality is a place where there's a lot of pain, right? For lots of people. And I'm not even going to make assumptions for you, but I'm just going to say if you grew up in the United States, you probably got stuff. We got stuff. And so I want to go slow enough that we can also be healers to each other and heal a little bit by just being kind and careful.
Mm.
That's such a great answer, and for all of our listeners to know, and I'm sure you know this firsthand too. I've seen it play out where if a partner isn't patient at all, they constantly want to rush things. It feels like they're just constantly starting over and starting over and starting over and start, and then it's very counterproductive if a partner is like,
Exactly.
okay, like let's move this along. We need to get this where we want it to be, and that's the worst thing you can do.
The worst thing. And we have to understand that good sex, really good sex, is predicated on some amount of safety.
Mhm.
Even if you're with somebody that you don't know, well, there's got to be some amount of safety or else your guards are up.
Yeah.
Right. And so safety, you can't have safety if you're rushing, if it's your way or the highway, if you're rushing somebody.
Yeah.
And so they're going to have to put their walls up to protect themselves. They're going to have to. It's not going to be good sex. And so I'm almost like, well, why would you settle for that? Why would you settle for that?
Yeah.
You all deserve so much more than that.
Mhm.
Take the time to actually build that because we didn't help you do this, you
Yeah.
know?
So it's sounding like an open conversation is kind of like step one. And that kind of help fosters like this really positive experience in the bedroom.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
S-
Yeah.
So I'm curious because all right, so you started teaching in 92, which means that you
Yeah.
grew up, in the I'm assuming the 80s era. Um
70s.
70s, okay, 70s. Um And I
That was
know
my
that
adolescence.
I know that doing a little bit of research on purity culture, it started in the 90s. So it started right
Yes.
around when you were
Mhm.
teaching. Did you
Yes.
see like that shift? Like were you able to actually see it in real time?
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of, I think, why I started to see it so dramatically around the year 2000, because I was hitting my students who hit their adolescence, hit 15 in 90. This is now 2000. And so they got the beginning of the true love weights thing. All that stuff started like, I think the thing on the Capitol lawn was in 92. It was just all in that early 90s, but we had been building steam since 1980. We started to put the abstinence only education stuff together in the 80s. And then, it kind of went from there. I mean, Reagan was a puppet for the religious right, the moral majority, which was brand new, really kind of coming together, coalesced at that time. Carter was the only evangelical president we had ever had, and we got him out because he was too compassionate. He wanted programs and things that were actually going to serve people. Put Reagan in, and Reagan was the puppet for, again, patriarchy with the guise of being religious. And it really wasn't, it didn't have anything to do with Christianity, but they love to call it that. It was about power and control and keeping the wealthy white man in control in the United States. And that's what it continues to be.
Sounds familiar
Mhm.
with current politics.
It does. It is. And it is.
Yeah.
And it's gone to a point, I think, where the blatant lying is now acceptable. It's happening, and people don't really even call it out as much anymore. And it wasn't so blatant back then. Frank Schaeffer, I don't know if you guys know who Frank Schaeffer is, but his father, Francis Schaeffer, was in the middle of all of that in the 80s, was part of the whole movement to make abortions this horrible thing. Abortions had never been anything that the Southern Baptist Church cared about at all. They were actually pro Roe v. Wade in 1974, all the way through 1979. But when they could no longer support segregated Christian colleges, because that became illegal to do, they had to find an issue to rally the Christian voters, and they chose abortion. This is documented. I could send you things that would show you that this is a documented event that happened. Well, Frank was in his 20s, and he was helping his dad. He was he was working with his dad and then he left the church, years later. When he hit his 60s and he was became a grandfather, he's now 72. He felt so horrible for the role that he had played in his 20s, supporting what his father was doing. And he was in some of these meetings where all these decisions were being made, that he wrote a book called Sex, Mom, and God. And he chronicles what happened from 1980 through 2008, I believe.
Wow.
And when I read that book, I was expecting pages to burst into flames, because he was naming people and places and conversations, political, all the way through, that built this whole thing that looked, on the surface was sold as Christianity, and it never was. It was never that. I mean, at the root of like Jesus ministry, I guess I'm comparing it to, but at the root of the evangelical, or excuse me, not the evangelical, but the root of the empire religion, yes, the empire religion was always about power and control.
I'm gonna have to read this book, because I feel like most people are so afraid to name other, like you get some like maybe vague, loose information. So when you get some solid information,
Yes.
fascinating.
Yeah. And follow him on Substack too. I mean, Frank he's a passionate person, and he's written many books, and all of them are worth reading, but he feels so badly about the role that he's played, that he's made it his life mission to educate people about what's going on in the socio-political climate. And I'm so grateful for him, because he has never mixed words. Like, he is always, you may not like what he says, but he will tell you what he thinks. And there's no, yeah.
Mind blown at this moment.
I know.
Mind blown.
Well, and I mean, it's the reason why, like, I think abortion will always be a hot topic now, simply because it can be. It's just
That's
the way
right.
it's divide. It's like,
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Well, and it's about women.
Yeah.
So we can do that. We can absolutely do that. We have the shoddiest women's health, it's just in comparison to men's health. And I was talking to a urogynecology friend of mine who's at the Cleveland Clinic, and when a man calls to get treatment around a urology issue, he's seen within 2 weeks, and a woman could be seen within 3 to 6 months if she has a urology issue. Like that's
Wow.
unacceptable,
Yeah.
unacceptable. And yet we continue, the misogyny in our culture it's crazy. And it has been now for quite a long time,
Yeah.
but
Well, and yeah, that's absolutely true. Like any like me personally, I've been through my own like infertility journey and like getting in to see like a reproductive endocrinologist, 7
yeah,
months. 7
oh,
months to get an appointment. And
yeah,
it's like, men are not like just like you said, like if they have to get into a specialist, they're not waiting that long.
no,
I remember it was like February and they were like, "We have September." And I was like, "Well, who knows what's going to be going on with me by then, That's a long
exactly.
time."
That's a long time. And
Mhm.
then when they tell you, well, you can't even seek care until you've been this far out or whatever, then, but they're not telling you they're going to make you wait more than half a
Uh-huh.
year.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's absolutely true.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
I know my mind is blown
It's
right
a
now.
lot.
Yeah, I really want to hear about Inanna Rising. I hope I'm pronouncing that
Yeah. In
correctly.
honor
Okay.
rising. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really want to
So,
hear more about that.
so I left my academic career in 2019. I was running the Northwest Institute on Intimacy, and and I had had a very difficult last decade at SPU, and it was just hard. And um, I had also buried like 4 really important people in my life, and
Mhm.
so that had been hard. And so I had said to a friend of mine, I need to understand how to heal, because my particular personality is just, I'm so forward moving and creating and stuff. I said, I need help stopping and figuring out how to deal with some of this grief. And so she had ideas, and one of those ideas, one of them was to go to a 2-week silent meditation retreat, and around the second week I'd probably drop. But the other one was using psychedelics. And I said, I have no idea what that means or what anything about that, and she said, well, it was legal, back in the 70s and the early 80s, and I was a therapist because she's older than I am by a bit. And she said, and so I used to do this with people and couples and stuff, and the way that it can open your heart and have you have an experience that helps you like heal the deep trauma in your life is really pretty remarkable. And so I still have, access to people of medical grade and yada yada. And I can come over, and this is how it'll go. So I did that. And for 6 hours, I went inside, and I literally, like, my dad had died. My dad and best friend had both died. They walked up to me
Mhm.
in my mind, as clear as you guys are. And I was able to talk to them about how much I missed them, about what was going on, about did they have ideas or suggestions for me. My best friend left 2 girls behind, and so those girls had become like mine. And so it was all this. And then I went in with 5 different things I wanted to deal with, and I just moved through every single one. And these like revelations would come to me, like, what about this? Or look at how this went, or whatever. And when it was over, I said to her, that was like a decade worth of therapy. Why aren't we providing this for people? We have so many
Mhm.
people with
Mhm.
so much trauma that is affecting their lives and their families. Like, we've got to do something. So I started looking for programs where I could study this. So I went into a year-long program. I studied ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin, learned all about the science and the research and all the things. And as we got about halfway through the program, I became pretty clear that I didn't want to go back to doing therapy again. That wasn't, because I do a ton of supervision around the country on people's cases and stuff. I really like being in that supportive role. Like, that role really works well for me. But if I can create an organization, because this is going to be the wild, wild west for the next decade. The
Mhm.
FDA did not come around for MDMA, even though they had unbelievable evidence, even though the FDA had been a part of approving every step of the research along the way. And then at the end says, we don't think your research was good enough. Right? It's still, again, colonizing
Yeah.
practices that America's so good at, right? So it's just going to be crazy. And yet, we have capacities to heal people that I believe, have some responsibility to. But people have to decide, what am I comfortable with? What am I not comfortable with? Am I going to put my license on the line? Am I not going to put my license on the line? So I put together an organization that was like, these are the values. This is what patient-centered care looks like. This is what really high values with regard to our indigenous communities, with regard to people who can't afford things, with regard to what good care is, harm reduction care, all of that. If you ascribe to these values and you are licensed and you are trained as either a doctor, a prescriber, or as a therapist, you can become a part of this organization. And inside this organization, we're going to have confidential consultations so you can ask your questions and say what you're worried about. We're going to have ongoing monthly trainings. We'll make all of those trainings online to take any time you want to. So we have like 40 online trainings you can take anytime you want to. A portion of the membership fee goes into a Indigenous Reparation Fund, and the board chooses organizations that we want to support. And then when we get to a certain membership level and we can afford it, we're going to bring on a development officer who will go build up for us a patient equity scholarship fund so our members can serve whoever they want to serve and they can afford to, because they have to still pay their bills too.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting rich here at all. But so we want to build something that they can then dip into and say, there's somebody I really want to serve, and great, here's, the money to do that. So that's what we are. We're just a container, a holding environment so that people who are out doing this very brave work feel like they can be held well and feel like they're in a community of other people they can respect. And that's what we're going to do until or if the US gets it right. But we're not getting much right now. We're not getting healthcare. So I want to have hope about this. I have hope for the people that are out there being brave doing this work, because there's incredible healing happening, but it's, more or less underground, or it's just in a ketamine clinic or whatever. And I just am all about really, really good practitioners out there doing good healing work because we need it.
Hey, that's right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what do one of these like sessions look like in a controlled environment? Because obviously, I mean, I've been through college. I know that when we were younger,
Yeah,
we definitely
sure,
experimented with,
sure. Oh
psychedelics.
yeah.
But what would be like in a professional setting? What would
Right. So like the MAPS MDMA trials were 3 medicine sessions with preparation sessions and integration sessions in between. So basically it's about 12 sessions over the course of a few months. And so you get all the preparation, like preparing your heart, your intentions, you understand what the setting's going to be like, you feel safe, because set and setting, again, is really important, that you feel safe. That has a lot to do with where your mind and heart goes, when you're in a psychedelic. And they talk about, you've got an inner healer, you've got an inner part of you that's working with, there's a mystery here. And we want to prepare you so that you feel as ready as you can feel for whatever is going to come that could be useful and helpful to you, And so there's preparation sessions, and then you do a medicine session that is about 6 hours long. So you come into it looks like a really safe, like little living room, right? And you have a place that you can, like a couch kind of a thing that you can lie down on or sit up, whatever you want. And you've got eye shades on, and you've got music that's very soothing that you're listening to, but also kind of evocative, like it can bring thoughts and, like might be wilderness sounds, or it might, it's evocative in some way. And then you have 1 or 2 people sitting with you the whole time, taking notes on anything you're doing, like tears are coming, this is the song, this is the time.
Wow.
Whatever, or big breaths were coming, this is the song, this is the time. So they're just taking notes. They're not talking to them unless they reach out to talk to them. One of the things they've talked about beforehand in the prep is, if you seem scared or whatever, do you want any kind of touch? Do you want my hand on your shoulder? Do you want me to hold your hand? Is there anything? So you establish all that ahead of time too. And then when they come out, then you do usually 2 or 3 integration sessions. So you might talk for a little bit after, just a bit. And then maybe a couple of days later, you talk for an hour or so. A couple of days later, you talk again, and you're seeing, because the brain actually, the neuroplasticity of the brain remains open to these new things. This is why there is neural pathways set immediately. And when I had my experience, today it's 6 years later, and it is still as clear today as it was then. So my brain literally rewired on things that some of them had been bothering me since my childhood.
Yeah.
Boom, gone. And it's not just a thought, it's my felt sense is
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
The felt sense is different. That's what's, I think, so powerful. And so anyway, you integrate for a few sessions, then you do that again, and then you integrate a few sessions, then you do that again, you integrate a few sessions. 68% of people that had PTSD symptoms for 20 years or more, 68% had no symptoms a year later.
Wow.
So
Oh
these are
my
people
goodness.
that could not do relationships. Like, they're so racked with depression and anxiety and ruminating thoughts and just horrible memories, all kinds of things, like vets, special ops vets, people who had 68% of our PTSD is sexual trauma, right?
Yeah.
And we know how that can shape somebody's life, and they feel free to live for the first time. So that's why I'm so passionate about it. It's like we've been doing this to people. We've been creating a culture that you are traumatized to live in.
Yeah.
And now we're not going to provide you anything. Like, I don't know, it's just more asinine than I can handle.
I guess what are some of the common misconceptions around your work when it comes to that? Because I'm part of the era of the DARE program, right? So drugs, they fry your brain, they're bad for you, and they're going to send you into this, the whole of
Mm-hmm.
society, right? So
Right. Well, drugs aren't all the same any way you look at them. So you have to understand how these drugs, what they are, what are the contraindications of those. So most of them will raise your blood pressure to some degree. So if you have heart conditions, or you have uncontrolled high blood pressure anyway, or whatever, yeah, probably not. Or if you have any history of psychosis or whatever, that probably isn't going to be good for you. So you have to know the contraindications. You have to do a medical evaluation beforehand. You have to be prepared adequately for what you're doing. You have to really want it. That helps. And then it's very controlled. It's just very controlled all the way through. And it's about your healing and restoration, right? This isn't about, whatever, taking MDMA and then going to a concert and enjoying that. That's fine. But that's a different experience. That's a heart opening, different experience. This is going in and dealing with what's inside, right? And being open to it. Yeah. And it's pretty incredible. So psilocybin was one of the things I studied. Psilocybin was legal in Oregon. Those of us that went to Eugene and did a practicum, a week-long practicum in Oregon, where we paired up. There's 20 of us or so. We paired up and then prepped, and then one day one person did and the other person sat for them, and then the next day they swapped, but we were in a larger group. One of the people that was in my group just released a YouTube just a bit ago, telling his arc of his story, healing from religious sexual shame and trauma, just his whole thing. So he did cannabis at one point, he did ayahuasca at another point, and then he was in this psilocybin thing. And he had gone from believing he did not deserve love and could not give or receive it, that he did not deserve it fundamentally, to the end being able to understand on some kind of compassionate level why that was the best his parents could do, given the context they were in, and why he was actually underneath that so loved by his mother in particular. Like she had all these things that kept getting in her way, but she did, and she had shown him in different ways, but he had just like, I'm not worthy of it, I'm not worth it. And at the end, he ends up going home to his partner, and for the very first time allowing himself to be loved and believing he was loved and deserved love. This turns somebody's life around. Their life is never the same again, And so now he's building a life based on his value and worth, right? And we just had like 3 different kinds of medicine situations, and they all kept working. Like the healer inside kept working to heal him. Yeah.
So this is
Beautiful.
it's life-changing work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's incredibly educational.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it's
Okay. I don't
brilliant.
I don't want to take too much of your time because we already hit the hour
I know
mark.
we're
Yeah.
close on time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I do have a couple questions I definitely want to ask you before we
Sure.
get out of here. One was the start of this podcast, we were really trying to tackle, overcoming sexual shame. And in our, I guess, Texas culture, pretty
Mhm.
much everybody that I know is impacted by purity culture. Like that's
Mm,
just like the number one thing that I see around all my peers is
Yeah.
that's kind of the teachings we always have. And one thing that I've seen is it's very gendered. Where unfortunately women were told to, you keep it under zip, don't get caught sometimes don't get caught alone with a guy that's unsupervised, don't just pretty much you are not a
Mhm,
sexual being, it's a sin until you
mhm,
hit marriage, and then at that point you have to become this insane baby maker, and
mhm.
it a lot of confusion. And then as far as like the male sector, I see them where you also should be pure, you should be an upstanding gentleman, but at the same time you need to have this insane amount of sexual experience by the time that you come to your wife, which kind of they don't align those concepts.
Contradictory.
Yeah, very
Yeah, yeah.
contradictory. So there's a lot of confusion when you're 18, 19, 20, deciding to get married, trying to
Yeah.
figure out your sexual self. What would be your advice to someone who's now coming into adulthood, has all these teachings, and is trying to kind of overcome that sexual shame that they've always known growing up? Like, what would be a good
It's
starting point?
a starting point. I would say, and this is going to sound goofy, so, but bear with me. The book that I wrote, Shameless Parenting, one of the things it has surprisingly also been incredibly good for is people who are trying to heal and understand how was I when I was growing up? Like what were the things I was curious about? If somebody had been there to really guide and love me through my development, what would they have done? Like, what are the kid books I should have been reading? And what are and literally walk themselves through their development in that book. The book at the end of each little chapter has like, go to the library, here are the top books for kids, top books for parents. Just
Wow.
literally go get them and read them. Help yourself grow up from the inside so that you have the language and the concepts and constructs that you need to then enter into conversation with somebody else, because you don't have any of that. It's a dearth of information for you and a dearth of language. And so you end up not speaking because you don't know what to say, and then having experiences you didn't want to have, married or not. And so this will give you the beginning of the language, the understanding, the talking, whatever. Do this for yourself first. And and then you'll see, like, there's places in there, but like, get to know your own body. Like, what's pleasure to you? What do you like to eat? What do you like to touch? What, like, get to know yourself, because pleasure and connection are part of what you're going to want to build a relationship on, probably, but you weren't given the scaffolding to do that. So, do some of that, and that will give you a start. That'll give you a place to then even know what to ask for next.
I've had clients, like an assignment I've given is for them to look at their own vulva.
Mhm,
And it's shocking how many have never done that.
mhm. Oh, yeah,
It's very
absolutely.
intimidating when you never have. But just
Mhm.
what you said made me think of that, of just getting to know your
Yes,
own body. People really don't know
yes.
their own body a lot of times.
No, well, and they were, again, shame from
Yeah.
preverbal
Mhm.
on, right? And so they were like, "Okay, hands off," or I go underground with it. So every time I have touched myself, I feel terrible about it. Well, honey, you're good. You're so you're
You're
so good.
okay.
You're so good. You're so good. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
That's good. Do you have any questions before I ask the closer one?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
Go for
cool.
it.
All right. So I'm going to give you my spiel I give to all of my guests. Is that this is a sex positive podcast, right? So me coming in very new to the sex positive movement, there was three things that I learned early on, and that was one, consent is key. You need consent for
Yes.
just about anything you do, right? Two, the sex positive movement is extremely inclusive. Body types,
Yeah.
culture, sexualities, everyone is able to
Mhm.
participate. And
Yep.
then the last one, which I very much align with, is the fact that sex education should be comprehensive, inclusive, and
Yes.
we should be just spreading it. I mean, that's a
Yes.
big important thing.
Yes.
So I'm curious what your sexual education was. You've touched on it a little bit at home, but I'm curious, how old were you whenever your parents had that first, I don't know, sexual talk in the home? Like, how did that go? And then I also want to know the formal setting. So what was your sexual education when it came to growing up in your school, whichever school and whatever area you were in?
Sure, sure, sure. So I grew up in Washington State, which is I still live in the Pacific Northwest now. We did have education in the fourth grade and fifth grade, and I was like you, I was the one that knew most things because my parents had been talking about it. There's no such thing as a talk in my family.
Mm.
There are talks. It's a sound bite sex home.
I love it.
So it's talked about as all along because you have different questions and you have different things that happen and you have different, so there's no such thing as a talk. It's 100 1-minute conversations, or maybe even 1,000, 100 1 minute. I mean, they are like this,
Yeah.
and I could tell you stories. I could tell you so many stories of things that happened, and they were always contexted, like I was going out with somebody and my dad's like, hey, if he wants to touch your pecs, you know what he's going for, don't you? I'm like, had, like it was just like this. Um, so there was never a talk. And because my mom, this was her life was like this too, grandparents were, that my mom worked in education. So she would even bring home like reels of film on sexuality.
Wow.
If you go on YouTube, you can type in sex ed in the 40s and sex ed in the 60s, and you'll see two different public school sex ed movies that were shown starting in 1947. And the one they redid in 1962, I think, was very similar to that one. It's just updated clothes, but basically the same information. You'll see that the sex ed that there was through the 1970s was more comprehensive, not comprehensive, but more comprehensive than what we still have today.
Wow.
And so I grew up in a culture, socio-political culture, where sexuality was talked about to some degree. Boys and girls were together, blah, blah, blah. It was reproductive stuff. It was very cis het, for sure. But I also grew up in a family that was, talking about this stuff in all kinds of laughing but serious. And I mean, just, and it was so normal, if you will, so common that I thought every family was like it. I just didn't get it. I just didn't get it until I was so much older. And then I was so shocked, and I'm still shocked, 25 years later.
Yeah. I love that it wasn't just like a talk in
I
your
love it.
family, because I feel like the talk doesn't really work. I mean, it's like
It
it's like
doesn't.
it's like a one time, like we're all uncomfortable. Let's
Yes.
make this as quick as possible, and then you
Right.
never revisit it. It's really weird and clunky, and
It is. And different kids are different. So if you're like, okay, we're going to do it in sixth grade. Well, you may have one that actually wants to ask questions in sixth grade. You got one like, don't come near that conversation with me, right? And so you really need to take, like you do with anything, tailor make it for what they're curious about, and then just give them that. So if they're 6 and they're like, how are babies made? You say, well, exactly what are you asking? Are you asking like where in the body? Are you asking, and get them to tell you exactly what they're
Yeah.
wanting, and then just give them that, and then be like, if you have other questions, let me know. But I don't want to overwhelm you with too much, because that's what also happens in the talk is you give people more than they want,
Yeah.
and then they like glaze over and they're like, brother, it's never worked. It's never worked. I agree.
Oh,
Yeah.
love it. Okay, yeah.
Great. Yeah. I think that was our last question. Before we kind of close out, we want to give you a moment to promote yourself, tell our listeners where to find you, what you're working on. And for anyone listening, we are going to include links too. So, like, if anyone wants to find you, follow you on social media, your website, we're going to have all that in the episode description. But we want to give you a minute to toot your own horn.
Yeah. The books that I had the honor of writing have done a lot of good in the world. So if you know somebody that needs some kind of easygoing sex education, the Shameless book is easygoing. It's just going to unfold it in a really loving, natural way. They can get their own little books at the library and stuff. Or if you know somebody that's becoming a parent and doesn't want to do to their kids what was done to them, get them that book. Just say, this is for you, to walk you through and hold your hand and whatever. People are always welcome to reach out to me, to DM me, and I'm happy to answer questions, when I can. And then I think that the Sex God book is just really helps people see the socio-political context that this stuff that they were told was from God actually grew up in. I mean, what it actually was. And it's not to take away, the book is written very lovingly and compassionately. It's one of the things I hear all the time from people.
Mhm.
I'm not at all wanting to slam your faith. Your faith may be a really important part of your life. It's an important part of my life, but there's a difference between faith and institutionalized religion. And they often have different goals.
Mm.
And sometimes for us to see the historical context that things were created in or are still sort of supported in gives us the ability to think critically and craft the life that's most meaningful for us. So I would say to whatever degree those books can be supportive of you, just to go for it. And if ever somebody can't afford the book, either book, DM me and I will, if you can't afford it, I don't want people to not get it because they can't afford it. I can send you a link to an audio version of the books, either one, that you can listen to and not have to pay for. So I want them to be available to people, to just free people, to liberate people, to live their life. You only get one life, one beautiful life. So make it
Yeah.
beautiful.
Damn right. Yes.
Awesome. Well, this was really great. I'm so glad we had you on. For anyone
Thank
listening
you.
again, this is Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers. And like I said, we'll have links to where to find her and all of her materials. And also, before we wrap up, just so everyone knows, we are open for listener support. And so if you like our podcast, you want us to keep producing really good content, you can support us for as little as $1 a month. And we have the link for our listener support in our podcast summary, and you can find it there. But again, everyone, thanks for tuning in. We are Sex Positivity Unfiltered, and remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.
Yeah.